Morrison sat quietly on the edge of the old sofa, the leather cracked and creaking beneath him. He looked out of place in the small apartment, his expensive wristwatch catching the light, the silence around him deafening. He clasped his hands together, elbows on his knees, eyes scanning the room for something, anything, to anchor a conversation. But his son moved around like he wasn't there. Jade didn't speak. He didn't sit. He busied himself, tidying papers, shifting tools from one corner to another, opening a cabinet only to close it again. Morrison could tell he wasn't actually doing anything, just avoiding. Then Morrison's gaze landed on a desk pushed against the far wall. Blueprints were scattered across it, half crumpled. A mechanical device, barely assembled, lay beneath a desk lamp with a dying bulb. The entire thing looked abandoned mid-thought. "What's this?" Morrison asked gently, walking toward it. Jade didn't look at him. "Just a project," he muttered. "It looks serious," Morrison said, examining the sketched layers of an engine prototype. "You working on it for school?" Jade's jaw tensed. He paused, then said flatly, "I was." He pulled the lamp cord out of the wall as if to end the topic. Had to put it aside. Real life's expensive. Morrison's stomach twisted. The calculations, the detail. It was clear his son had talent. And yet here he was, forced to choose between survival and ambition. "I can see the effort in this," Morrison offered, careful with his words. "You have a gift." Jade turned to face him, arms folded, his expression unreadable. "Gifts not much good when rent's due," he said, voice quiet but sharp, "and the school doesn't take dreams as payment." Morrison felt the sting behind those words, subtle but unmistakable. He wasn't being yelled at. Jade didn't need to raise his voice to show just how far apart their lives had been. "I didn't know," Morrison said softly, struggling against the tightness in his chest. "If I had..." Jade cut him off with a small shake of his head. "But you didn't." He walked past Morrison, picked up a wrench, then set it down again. "That's the part I can't get over. All that money, all those buildings with your name on them, and somehow you didn't know." Morrison had faced powerful men across glossy tables. He had silenced critics in headlines. But right now, in this dim apartment, he couldn't silence the truth in his son's voice. He lowered himself back onto the couch, unsure of how to respond. All he knew was, for once in his life, he couldn't afford to say the wrong thing. The silence between them stretched again as Morrison eased back into the worn sofa, carefully choosing his next words. His eyes lingered on the desk, on the engine parts that looked like they hadn't been touched in weeks. He wanted to ask more, but Jade's posture said he was already halfway to shutting down. Still, Morrison had come this far. "You're still working at the garage?" Morrison finally asked, his tone neutral but full of interest. Jade was standing by the sink now, rinsing a cup like it suddenly mattered. "Yeah," he replied simply. "Been there a while now. Basic stuff. Repairs, diagnostics. I've gotten good at it." Morrison nodded, watching him. "And that's your plan, long-term?" There was a short pause before Jade responded. "No," he said, setting the cup down a little too hard. "I want my own garage one day. Not just a workshop, but something bigger. A full-service tech hub, hybrid systems, custom tuning, energy-efficient conversions. A real place that does more than just patch old engines." Morrison's eyebrows lifted. He wasn't expecting something that grand. "That's ambitious." Jade turned to him, arms folded. "Is that your way of saying unrealistic?" "No," Morrison said carefully. "It's my way of saying it sounds like something worth fighting for." Jade tilted his head slightly, studying him. "Well, I've been fighting. You just showed up for the end credits." Morrison exhaled slowly. "I know. I deserve that. I can't rewrite the past, but if there's any way to support your future, connections, funding, even just talking through a plan, I'd like to help." Jade shook his head immediately. I don't need fixing or rescuing. I didn't say you did. I'm not some abandoned dream you can suddenly pick up and polish, Jade added, voice sharper now. I've been building this life, brick by brick, alone. Morrison sat with that, not interrupting. His instinct as a father was to offer, to do, to solve. But none of that seemed to work here. Everything Jade said came from a place of exhaustion, tired of surviving, and tired of being reminded that he had to. I'm not here to take over anything, Morrison said at last, but helping, that's what a father is supposed to do. The word slipped out again, father, and Jade visibly flinched just for a second. He looked away, jaw clenched, like the title still stung every time it hit the air. Morrison noticed but didn't press it. He leaned back slightly, rubbing his palms together. You don't trust me. That's obvious, and I get it. You have every reason not to. Jade didn't argue. So maybe we don't start with blueprints or plans or dreams, Morrison continued. Maybe we start smaller, just a cup of coffee, talk, no pressure, no strings. You talk, I listen, if you want. Jade blinked, almost confused. He'd expected pushback, maybe a power play, not this quiet offer wrapped in patience. A coffee, he repeated, like the idea was foreign. Morrison gave a small nod. Yeah, just coffee? Jade let out a short breath, not quite a laugh, but something close. You're making this complicated. You're making it difficult, Morrison said, and for the first time, a small smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. Jade didn't return the smile. Not yet, but he didn't shut him down either. He stared at the floor for a while, then up at the unfinished project, and finally back to the man sitting in his living room. The man he wasn't sure how to feel about. There was still distance between them. Years, pain, questions. But there was also a flicker of something else now. Possibility. Jade hesitated for a long moment, arms still folded, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he gave a slight nod. Fine. One coffee. That's it. Relief washed over Morrison, subtle but deep. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't trust. But it was something. A beginning. The next evening, Morrison waited alone at a quiet coffee shop tucked between a grocery store and a pharmacy along a modest street in Surulere. It was far from the polished lounges and private clubs he was used to. No valet outside, no piano playing in the background, no gold-lettered menus. But Jade had chosen it, and Morrison didn't argue. He'd even offered to pick him up, but Jade had shut that down instantly. I can walk, he'd said curtly. So Morrison respected that. Every inch of this was on Jade's terms. When Jade walked in, his hoodie slightly damp from the evening drizzle, Morrison stood up instinctively, but Jade just gave him a small nod before sliding into the seat opposite him. They ordered. Black coffee for both, no sugar. Morrison had laughed softly to himself. Victoria used to drink it the same way. For a while, they sipped in silence. Morrison didn't push. He watched his son quietly, trying to read the guarded expression he wore like armor. Then slowly, Jade began to speak. Not about Victoria or the years they'd missed, but about engines, concepts, big ideas. He talked about renewable tech in vehicles, designs he'd been working on long before he dropped out. He explained with a fire in his voice, hands moving as he described energy flows, prototype schematics, and how he'd once tried to pitch a cleaner engine model to a small investor, but got ignored the moment they saw his work boots. Morrison listened, really listened. He kept his own voice measured, careful not to overstep. He didn't ask why Jade hadn't come to him sooner. He didn't offer to pay for his schooling again, or mention the companies he owned who would jump at someone like him. Number tonight wasn't for offers. It was for trust. You remind me of her, Morrison thought to himself quietly. Victoria. The same spark, the same relentless drive, ambitious, passionate, and refusing to let anything, not even his limp, get in the way of what he believed in. "You've got a sharp mind," Morrison finally said out loud as Jade paused to sip his coffee. "The kind that builds something lasting." Jade didn't respond, but the corner of his mouth twitched, almost like a smile before he caught himself. The conversation drifted into lighter topics for a while: football, the chaos of Lagos traffic, Jade's favorite mechanic who taught him more than half the things he knew. For the first time, Morrison felt like they weren't just sitting across from each other. They were talking, connecting, like father and son. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. And for a moment, he let himself believe maybe the gap between them was starting to shrink. But just as they stood to leave, Jade tossed his paper cup into the bin and said, almost too casually, "Just so we're clear, this doesn't change anything." Morrison turned to him slowly. "I understand." He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a slim business card, and extended it toward Jade. "No strings, just a number," he said. "If you ever need anything, even if it's just someone to talk to." Jade stared at it for a moment before taking it, slipping it into his wallet without a word. They stepped outside into the cool Lagos air. The clouds had parted, but the scent of rain still lingered. "I'll walk," Jade said, before Morrison could even suggest calling his driver. "It's just a few blocks." Morrison didn't argue. He simply nodded, watching as Jade turned and disappeared into the quiet night. His hoodie pulled up, hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched against the breeze, but his steps steady. Morrison stood there, alone outside the coffee shop, a strange mix of hope and sorrow swirling in his chest. He didn't know what would come next. He didn't know if Jade would ever call. But for the first time in 2 decades, he felt something he hadn't dared feel in years. He felt like a father. Morrison caught himself glancing at his phone more times than he cared to admit. Each vibration made his chest tighten, only to find emails or calendar alerts, never the message he truly wanted. Since that evening at the coffee shop, something had shifted. Jade hadn't let him in completely, but the wall between them didn't feel as solid anymore. Maybe there was a crack now, a chance. It had been days, no text, no call. But Morrison didn't want to chase him. Not yet. The last thing he wanted was to scare the boy off again. He understood that building trust wouldn't happen overnight. This wasn't like closing a deal or navigating boardroom politics. This was uncharted territory, emotional terrain where money meant nothing and silence carried weight. He would wait, as long as it took, absolutely. Here is your requested rewrite. All original lines preserved, just with Morrison suggesting that law would have suited her more, as you asked. The structure, tone, emotional depth, and flow remain intact. Morrison was in his study when the message came through. "You free?" Just 2 words from Jade, but they made Morrison sit up instantly. He didn't waste time replying. "Yes. What's up?" A few seconds passed, then another text popped up. "There's a place down the street. Chill vibes. Not loud. I go there when I need to clear my head. Come if you want." Morrison didn't even ask for the address. He was already slipping into something more casual. Well, as casual as a man like him got, and grabbing his car keys. The spot wasn't anything close to Morrison's usual kind of hangout. Tucked between a barber shop and a game center, the place pulsed with quiet rhythm. Not too loud. Dim lights, wooden stools, a few girls dancing lazily near the speakers, laughter floating in the air like smoke. The energy was light, easy. Jade was already seated in the corner, one hand wrapped around a sweating bottle of malt. When he saw Morrison walk in, he didn't stand, just lifted his chin in acknowledgement. Morrison took the seat opposite him. "Nice place," he said, glancing around with a small, amused smile. Jade snorted. "Don't pretend you're used to places where people dance without champagne towers." Morrison chuckled. "Caught me." They ordered drinks, nothing fancy. A soft drink for Jade, palm wine for Morrison at the boys' teasing suggestion. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching people mill about, music humming gently in the background. Then, as the beat shifted to something slower, more nostalgic, Jade leaned back in his chair and spoke. "I've been thinking," he said, eyes fixed on the ceiling fan above. "If we're gonna be whatever this is, we should probably know a bit about each other." Morrison turned to him, nodding. "Fair." There was a pause. Then Jade said, quieter this time, "Tell me about her. About Mum. I know pieces, but I want your version." Morrison smiled softly, a faraway look in his eyes. "Your mother," he began, his voice low, thoughtful, was something else. "We met when we were kids. I had just moved to Lagos, awkward, skinny, and walking funny because of my limp. It didn't take long before the older boys picked me out as easy prey." Jade glanced at him, surprised. "You? Bullied?" Morrison laughed. "Oh, they had a field day, and I didn't even try to fight back. I thought that was just how things went." He paused, eyes shining with the memory. "But then one day, out of nowhere, this girl with wild braids and a voice too loud for her size came storming into the field and told them off. I still remember the silence. The boys didn't even know how to react." Jade smirked. "That sounds like her." "She was fierce," Morrison continued. "She used to say, 'If I don't stand up for people who can't fight back, then who will?' She wanted to study law, you know. She would have been one hell of a lawyer, always standing for the oppressed." He gave a faint chuckle and added, "Honestly, law would have suited her more than anything else. She had that fire, calm on the outside but always ready to fight for what's right. And me, I dragged her into the business world. I had this vision of building something big, and she believed in me more than I believed in myself. She encouraged me when I was still fumbling proposals and pitching terrible ideas to uninterested investors." Jade raised an eyebrow. "You fumbled?" "Oh, I was a disaster," Morrison admitted with a laugh. "She read through my first contract and told me it sounded like a failed poem. Then she rewrote it and made it make sense." Jade laughed, the sound short but real. Morrison leaned forward a little, voice softer now. She was calm, quiet, but her presence lit up any room. She didn't need to talk much. People just felt better when she was there. Jade's smile returned, smaller this time, tinged with emotion. That sounds like her." The two sat in silence for a while. The laughter from the girls dancing drifted over again. Morrison looked at his son, not just as the boy Victoria left behind, but as the man sitting in front of him now, full of fire, ambition, wounds he never asked for. Morrison cleared his throat. "Thanks for this," he said, "for letting me be here." Jade didn't look at him. He just reached for his drink and took a sip. Morrison smiled. Jade shifted in his seat, elbows resting on the edge of the table, eyes narrowing slightly, as if something in Morrison's words unlocked a deeper curiosity. He didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then he spoke, not harshly, but with a tone that hinted at something softer, something cracking open. "Then what?" he asked, quiet but firm. "After the scholarship, after you left, what really happened?" Morrison looked at his son, really looked at him, and for once, he didn't feel like a businessman trying to explain numbers. He felt like a man who had failed someone, two people actually, and had been waiting years for the chance to admit it out loud. He let out a long breath, then began. "I had just graduated from Unilag," he said, his voice slow and heavy. "Second class upper in business administration. Wasn't flashy, but I was hungry. Victoria, she saw that in me long before anyone else did." He smiled faintly at the memory. "She found this finance scholarship online, said it was for a business and investment program abroad. part of a youth entrepreneurial scheme in the UK. I didn't believe I had a shot, but she did. She helped me with the application, sat with me through every essay draft, proofread my statements, even forced me to rewrite one because she said it sounded like I was apologizing for dreaming. Jade let out a low chuckle, shaking his head slightly. That sounds like her. Morrison nodded slowly. She made me send it. And when the acceptance came in, I wanted her to come with me. I begged, said we'd work things out together, that she could study there too, maybe shift into finance, join the business world. He paused, his throat tightened. But she said no. Jade looked up again, attentive. She said her dream wasn't tied to mine, Morrison continued, eyes fixed on the untouched bottle in front of him. Said she wanted to become a midwife, said she wanted to bring life into the world, not chase numbers on screens. And you know what? She wasn't dismissing me. She said it with so much calm, with so much certainty, like she had found her truth and nothing was going to shake it. The cafe noise faded into the background as Morrison's voice became more strained. We made promises, he said, to write every week, to call, to not drift. We told ourselves distance wouldn't break us, that this was just a phase. He looked down, blinking hard. But life has its own plans. I got there, and it was like stepping into another world. Everything was moving fast. Classes, seminars, internships. I was soaking in knowledge, growing my contacts, building a path. Before I knew it, a year had passed. Then 2. His voice cracked now, raw with weight. I kept telling myself I'd call tomorrow, that I'd come home next holiday, that there was still time. I got swallowed by it, Jade, by ambition, recognition. My name started showing up in small business blogs, then papers. I was too busy building my world to notice I was losing hers. Jade leaned back, his expression hard to read, but his silence was loud. She never stopped supporting me, Morrison added, barely above a whisper. She sent me messages, encouraging ones, told me she was proud, but somewhere along the way, I stopped replying. He buried his face briefly in his hands, then looked up again. I told myself I'd return when I had something big to show for it, something worthy of her, but by the time I realized how far I'd drifted, she was gone. Jade's voice was lower now, and colder. She never talked about you. Morrison's breath caught. She didn't badmouth you, didn't curse you, just avoided it. Every time I asked about you, she'd just say, he had his reasons, and that was it. I thought maybe you'd just left, that you didn't care. I cared, Morrison said instantly, the pain in his voice undeniable. I cared too much. That was the problem. I thought success would prove I was enough, that I could come back and be someone she'd be proud of. But what she needed was me. And I didn't show up. Jade looked away, jaw tight. Morrison continued, his tone hollow but honest. I would give anything to go back, to make a different choice. But regret doesn't fix what's already broken. The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was full of grief, of memories lost, of chances never taken. And in that moment, Morrison Bruce realized something. He had built an empire, yes, but he had lost his foundation. They stood in silence outside the small local spot, the faint rhythm of music and laughter still humming behind them. The streets of Surulere were quieter now, the night wrapping around them like a blanket, thick with everything unsaid. Jade leaned against the rail, his hands in his hoodie, staring ahead at the passing Kiki that rattled by. Morrison stood beside him, arms folded, but his heart felt like it was beating right beneath his skin. They had spent hours talking, more than he ever thought Jade would allow. And for the first time, Morrison didn't feel like a stranger in his own son's world. As Jade glanced down the road, preparing to leave, Morrison turned to him. I'd like to see you again, he said, voice steady but vulnerable. Not just to talk about your mother, But about you too. Jade looked at him from the corner of his eye but didn't say anything. I want to know what makes you laugh, what keeps you up at night. I want to know the version of Victoria that only you knew, Morrison continued, his voice low, thick with emotion. I missed out on so much, and I don't want to keep missing. The words hung between them like warm breath in cold air. Then, hesitantly, Morrison took a small step closer and stretched out his arms for a hug, something quiet and full of hope. But Jade didn't move. He looked at the gesture, tilted his head slightly, and extended his hand instead. Morrison dropped his arms and accepted the handshake without protest. It was firm, real, and in its own way, just as meaningful. As they let go, Jade glanced up at him, eyes darker now, thoughtful. Do you think, Jade began slowly, if she were still here, she'd have forgiven you? The question caught Morrison off guard. It dug deeper than anything else said tonight. His throat tightened as he stared at his son, unsure how to answer. But Jade didn't wait for a reply. He gave a faint nod, turned, and began walking away into the shadows of the street, leaving Morrison standing in the glow of the diner's old yellow bulb, haunted by the question and the silence that followed it. Of course. Here's the exact rewrite with no lines removed, just enhanced with raw emotional intensity and a powerful visual of a billionaire breaking down in tears, as requested. Morrison stood alone on the balcony of his penthouse, high above the city lights of Lagos. The night was unusually quiet. Even the wind seemed hesitant, like it too was waiting for something. Below, the chaos of honking cars and restless voices faded into a distant hum, muffled by the weight pressing against his chest. His fingers curled around the cold steel railing as he stared out into the skyline, the one he had fought so hard to conquer. Each building, each deal, each award, each glowing headline. It all looked different now, smaller, quieter, empty. How had he come so far and still lost everything that mattered? He could still hear Victoria's voice in his head sometimes, gentle, grounded, always urging him to slow down, to be present, to breathe. The world will wait for you, Morrison, she used to say, but your heart won't. And yet, he had run, faster than anyone else, blindly, determined to prove something to a world that barely remembered names once the ink dried. He thought success would bring her back somehow, that when his name finally meant something, she'd find him, that maybe she'd see him on TV or in a magazine and pick up the phone. But she never did. He had spent so many years chasing validation, chasing power, chasing a version of himself that looked good from the outside. And all the while, she was somewhere, carrying the weight of his absence, raising a child he didn't even know existed. Jade. Even now, Morrison could hardly say the name without a flood of emotion hitting his chest. His son. A grown man with scars he never got the chance to protect him from. A young man full of potential, yet weighed down by walls built from silence, bitterness, and abandonment. And Victoria. She had done it alone. All of it. His throat tightened. His eyes burned. He had abandoned the only woman who had ever loved him without conditions. And now he would never hear her laugh again. Never get to say, "I'm sorry." Never tell her that everything he built meant nothing without her in it. If he could go back, he wouldn't take the scholarship, wouldn't answer the call, wouldn't chase the spotlight. He would stay. He would choose her. But time is cruel. It doesn't offer rewinds. Only reminders. Morrison had every material thing a man could want, and not a single piece of peace. Now, all he had left was a son he barely knew, and a hope he was too afraid to admit. That maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to give Jade the father he never had. Morrison exhaled, the air sharp and heavy in his chest. He closed his eyes and whispered to the night, to the wind, to whatever was listening. Forgive me. And right there, the man the world called a lion in the boardroom, the billionaire who sat atop empires, broke. Tears streamed freely down his face as he slumped against the railing, fists clenched, sobs racking his chest like a boy lost in the dark. Alone, above the city that once praised him, Morris and Bruce wept for the woman he lost, and the time he could never get back. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the final part, where the truth about why Victoria left will finally be revealed.